The top game in round 7 at the Candidates Tournament in Moscow was, of course, the Battle of the Leaders. Sergei Karjakin with white against Levon Aronian. This is the position after 10 moves, and it's a pretty standard King's Indian attack type position. You can see we have this very familiar setup with white's pawns with his chain, and something slightly unusual. Aronian has advanced the A pawn already, but actually this can transpose back to normal lines. If, for example, Aronian had played B5 here, and then Karjakin plays E5, we have this very standard kind of position where white is attacking on the king side and black attacks on the queen side. Fischer won a very famous game with white playing A3. I'm sure you can look that up for yourself if you want to. But instead of allowing that, instead of playing B5, Aronian did something a little bit different. Actually, I think he played a very clever move, actually. He simply took on E4. And in combination with the pawn here, I think this isn't a bad idea. Normally, white would recapture and play E5 and get a lot of space. But I have a feeling it was Aronian's intention to play E5 here. Now, normally wouldn't like this move because it leaves a big hole here on D5, and after, let's say, knight C4, that knight might well spin round into here. But somehow this doesn't look quite so dangerous when black has played the pawn to A4, so white hasn't been allowed to play A4. And it could mean that later on black can use this. So the C4 square isn't quite as stable, and let's say queen C7. That just protects this pawn, and then the rook can swing over to cover the D5 square. I think this could well be actually quite promising for black, because if white plays C3 to cover the D4 square, this outpost, then you can see that black's A pawn is actually very useful. Anyway, this is all very theoretical. Instead of this, I think sensibly Karjakin took with the knight on E4. Aronian exchanged and then played B5. So I think Aronian's opening has come off pretty well here. He's gained some space on the queen side, and white's attack, well, I don't think it isn't really anything. I was expecting now Karjakin to play bishop f4 and probably just to go for an exchange of pieces with knight e5, and I think after trading, black's slight space advantage doesn't sort of mean so much in this position. It should be roughly level. But instead, Karjakin went for it on the king side with knight g5, and I was really surprised about this. Well, first of all, there's the potential with the bishop on the long diagonal, so Aronian snuffed any tactics out with rook a6. Good move, protecting the knight, bringing the rook off the long diagonal, and sometimes the rook can even protect along the 6th rank. Queen h5, well, this was Karjakin's idea, threatening mate, of course. Aronian stopped that. After the game, Karjakin said he'd actually intended to play rook g4 here. Now, this looks, at first glance, to be very dangerous. Here's the idea, it's very clever. If black were to play a very obvious move like e5, threatening the rook, then white wins brilliantly here with knight to e6. This is great stuff. The knight has to be taken. Now, white has bought himself some time to give up the rook, and we're in with the queen in the danger zone, and we follow up with the bishop. Mate threatened again on h7, only move f5, then the bishop can be snapped off. I mean, it's wonderful. Black's position falls apart like a house of cards here. And then we take on c6, and we're going to threaten queen h6 and bishop d5. Probably don't forget that rook might be snapped. Basically, white should be winning that position. It's a really clever idea, but knight e5 is actually a good defence. And for a start, this knight e6 stuff just doesn't work. Now you can see, quite important to have that rook covering across on the 3rd rank. White can try other stuff, but it's just not working. very good idea, simply hitting the rook. So Karjakin had to retreat the knight. So he's basically being driven back now, and this little demonstration on the king side is coming to nothing, and it's starting to look very promising for black. Here I was expecting Aronian to play bishop f6, just to put this bishop on the diagonal, but well, he played bishop d7, which is also pretty good for black, actually. Karjakin sensibly traded some pieces. But Aronian is better here, no doubt about it. Queen came to f6. You can see that white pieces are being driven back. Black's development is pretty good. And he has a nice space advantage. Well, coming out of the opening, this is a bit of a dream position for black. I mean, white is solid, but still. Okay, rook b1 played by Karjakin. Of course, he needs to develop the bishop, so he's just protecting the b pawn. And now here, Aronian went for it on the king side with f4. He could have played b4, and I think that would certainly keep some advantage. Idea, maybe just swinging the rooks across to the b file to get some pressure here. Black's slightly better there. Instead, f4, dangerous move, but once again we see how cool Karjakin is in defence. He simply took this pawn. I mean, this is mad. Well, it seems like it at first sight, but it's very cool defence. So the f-file is opened, but Karjakin has calculated he's still okay here. Defends this pawn. The rook swings up, danger. But, okay, took this pawn. Material level now. Karjakin blocked with the queen. Now the critical moment. Seems like things are building nicely for black. Maybe you can play rook g5 or something like that. But queen c7 is an excellent defence. I mean, it looks crazy to move the queen so far away, but it's good defence. If black tries to attack straight away with rook g5, then just queen takes bishop, and the problem is after queen g4 you're threatening mate, but white's queen just slips to the side, defending the bishop from a long way off, and the attack comes to nothing. And also that rook, you know, if that rook were on the other side of the board anywhere sensible, then black would probably be winning. But no, this is actually black's problem. That rook is out in Siberia. It's not in Moscow. So queen f7. Aronian had to come back with the queen. Queen b7, very good counterattack, hitting the rook. Rook had to come to d6, and now Karjakin can force off the queen with queen b8 check, hitting the rook at the same time. So Aronian had to offer the exchange of queens, and well, all the tension has gone out of the position, and in a couple more moves they agreed to draw. Interesting game, but cool defence from Karjakin. So yeah, well, no one's striking out into the lead yet. Let me just show you one more game from this round very quickly. Nakamura against Topalov. Both players kind of not the luck not running their way at the moment in the tournament. Both players wanted to play ambitiously today. You could see that from the opening and the way they were playing. And Topalov has sacrificed a piece. This position after the 28th move, and they're reaching the time pressure, and things are really getting tense. So Topalov a piece down with black, but he's got the initiative. You can see that in this position he's simply threatening the very crude queen here and queen g2 mate. It's a beginner's checkmate, but very dangerous. Nakamura defended with queen d1, so that means if queen h3 you can just snap off the pawn. So rook d8 from Topalov. So the pressure increasing. Nice pin on the d file. Looks nasty. I mean, probably the threat is just to exchange everything on d2 and play queen h3 and mate again. So Nakamura brought the queen back, threatening a counterattack. Queen takes pawn and mate. Topalov had to bring his rook back. So they've repeated the position. So if queen d1, probably it would end in a draw, but Nakamura wanted to play ambitiously. He played knight d1. So the queen defending laterally, so queen h3, queen takes pawn in this position. But this was a very risky move. If Topalov had found queen f5, who knows what would have happened in this game. Threat, very simple. Black just wants to play rook d3, nudge the queen out of the way. Well, for example, rook a2, rook d3, shift the queen, then you come back and go for mate. Now, there are various defences here. For example, rook e3, just putting a bit more pressure here, but after queen d7, very nasty pin. Well, that dangerous pawn can be eliminated, but white has to return the piece. Now, level material again, but black has the initiative. No doubt about it. You know, black's king looks more secure than white's, and you know that knight can come in here, and don't know, trickier for white to play than black, I think. But instead of queen f5, Toppy played knight d5, hitting the rook. Rook came back, but somehow the danger is passing, and it was quite clear that with this next move, Toppy had lost the thread in the position. He's running out of ideas. King h2, good move, covering this square, preventing the queen coming in. The knight dropped back. Bishop up, attacks the rook. And now Topalov could see that he was kind of going backwards. He tried giving up more material, rook b8, but I'm afraid this simply wasn't good enough. Black now a whole rook down. Nakamura defended successfully in time pressure. Still tricky, knight g4 threatened, but white can afford to give up some material here. This is how the game concluded. Exchange of rooks, and now Nakamura simply brought the queen back, and in this position Topalov resigned. Queen still can't go for mate because that pawn is on, and after knight takes rook, well, white is just a whole bishop up for nothing. So easy win for white. So there we go. Yeah, that was actually the only win today. So Nakamura just recovers a little bit. So that's the halfway point in the tournament. After 7 rounds, Karjakin and Aronian lead with 4.5. Anand 4 points. He drew very easily against Giri today. Caruana and Giri 3.5. It's really still wide open. Karjakin was asked after the tournament, "Are you getting nervous?" And he said, "No, too early to be nervous. Still 7 rounds to play," and very objective, very level-headed. He's right. You know, if any player now put together a couple of wins, he could find himself in the lead. So it's still incredibly close. There we go, folks. See you for round 8 tomorrow.